Hi, and welcome to another edition of Studio 411. I'm your host, Larry Dasilva. Got a great guest for you this day, Gay Culverhouse, who, as former president of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, was the woman in the men's locker room, you might say. 20 years later, she's trying to keep her former players not only perhaps alive, but out of the emergency room. She's written a fascinating book called Throwaway Players, the Concussion Crisis from Pee Wee football to the NFL. And we welcome Dr. Gay Culverhouse. Gay, thank you for being with us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
I know in the book, you dedicated the book to all the members of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers who obviously were there during your and your father, Hugh Culverhouse, the owner's tenure from 76 to 1994. As you called them, your extended family. Elaborate on that a little bit.
Well, when you're in the trenches together, you bond very closely. And as you know, we started our first 2 years only winning 2 games. And those were the last 2 games of the second year. It was very difficult to walk into that stadium week after week and very difficult to get on that team bus week after week. And we had fans that would boo us. We had people throw things at our bus, and we bonded together and became very close.
Sounds almost like a soccer match. I can remember back in the day when the team lost, they better run quickly to the bus. That's what that sounds like. And of course, in those days, your coach was a legendary coach, I believe, USC, John McKay.
Absolutely.
That went to Tampa Bay, and we'll talk a little bit more about the McKay family a little bit later on. Obviously, we know the purpose in writing the book, again, to, I think, help enlighten people as to some of the things I think that sometimes people either don't know or, frankly, I think sometimes don't want to know. You know better than anybody the popularity of football just keeps growing and growing, but yet, this whole thing with the concussions and the steroids and the almost increasingly erratic behavioral issues that are going on, whether it's at the college level, most recently like Rutgers University with some major issues going on, or at the pro level. And as you and I discussed off air, so it's not just prevalent to football, it's pervasive throughout most of the major sports throughout this country as well as the world.
Yes, have you noticed that there was an article recently that said that football had grown 4% in popularity while all other sports had decreased in popularity?
Oh, no doubt. I mean, again, you look at even the advent of the fantasy leagues, and which, again, some now are trying to lobby that it's basically a kind of a more sophisticated way of gambling, but I think in the end that it'll prevail. And of course, the leagues are all tied into that, and of course, social media, which of course we're using here as we speak, it plays a big part. I mean, in the old days, you used to have games on tape delay or blackouts. Now, my God, that's like almost archaic. Everything is instantaneous, and let me get out my tablet or my iPhone but yet, I don't know, maybe it's me, an older person. I still have trouble getting scores, so I don't know. I must not be doing something right. I'm not sure. One of the things you talked about in the book, or in doing the book, was, again, your intention in doing this book was not to kill the game of football, but was to make it safer. Quite a Herculean task, to say the least.
It is, and I was so disappointed at Pac-Man Jones this past week. I'm sure you read or heard about it, where he literally ripped the helmet off of Amari Cooper and bashed his head into the ground and into the helmet.
Yeah.
And the Financial Times today said the problem was Amari Cooper did not act like he was injured. If he had writhed on the ground like soccer players, perhaps Pac-Man Jones would have gotten a harsher penalty. But since he said he wasn't injured and got up and walked off, then he got $35,000 of fine. And Pac-Man immediately turned around and said, I'm appealing that fine, and it's not going to impact the way I play. Poor choice of words in this day of the NFL.
Exactly. We're here with Dr. Gay Culverhouse, author of Throwaway Players, The Concussion Crisis from Pee Wee Football to the NFL. For those of you who say, she looks and sounds familiar, well, Gay, of course, a few years back in 2009, I believe, testified before Congress on football head injuries, successfully changed the policy of including an independent neurologist on the sidelines of every game. And Gay's work with former players, again, has appeared nationally in many media outlets. In November 2009, she formed, which we're going to spend some time on this hour, the Gay Culverhouse Player Outreach Program Incorporated, a nonprofit organization to further the work nationally for retired players. There, I knew we'd have a cameo. There they are. There they are. What are their names? Are their names Pac-Man and I'm trying to think who else, you know.
No, this is Hank and Minnie.
Hank and Minnie, there you go.
Hank and Minnie.
That's okay. Believe me, many a times when I'm talking to people setting up these interviews, my Beagle Blue Tick sounds a lot like that. So maybe Blue is probably baying as we speak. But there we go. See, they say things can't happen on live television. You state in the book, and quite emphatically, even during your testimony, that the league has done a poor job. I think that's an understatement of addressing its former players and their well-being. It seems to me like the minute that they're off the practice or the field and their bags are packed, they basically become non-entities to the rest of the league.
And, you know, that's something that has been discussed quite a lot this past week with the death of Tyler Sash. Tyler, as you know, won a couple of Super Bowl rings, and with a concussion in 2013, his career was ended with the NFL, and he searched for several years trying to find his new identity now that it was not tied to the NFL. They have not completed the autopsy. They completed preliminary autopsy results and could find no serious extraneous cause for his death. But his friends on social media have posited that he no longer had his NFL identity and was a lost soul.
Wow.
Now, I don't know that personally, but it speaks to your point exactly.
Yeah. And of course, in your own way, via the book and the outreach program, and of course, I think, you know, even from your days as president of the Tampa Bay Bucks, you've taken up the fight again, not only for past players, hopefully today's players, but really almost America's youth, to ensure that no one should be, as you said in the book, quote, dying to play sports. And you know, it's kind of scary. You know, scary that not to just say football, because as I was reading, getting ready for our interview today, I mean, whether it's rugby, whether it's soccer, you and I have talked about basketball, even hockey. I mean, some of those, again, I'm not going to rank them in order because I'm not an expert in that. But you know, even baseball. Baseball, you have concussions that just seem to be diagnosed almost on a daily basis, and I just have to assume that years ago the technology or the medical expertise wasn't there to even, oh, he's got a headache or she's got a headache, you know.
Called it a ding in football.
Yeah.
You got ding. But, you know, one sport you left out that you have to seriously consider, Larry, is gymnastics. My granddaughter, for example, is a very highly ranked gymnast at the high school level. And one of her friends was given a full scholarship to college to do gymnastics, but her junior year suffered a concussion. She did not compete her senior year, And when she showed up at her university in Texas to take advantage of her scholarship and her membership on the gymnastics women's team, she was evaluated by their physician and told she could not participate in gymnastics because her head injury was still causing her balance issues. And this is 2 years later.
2 years later, I was going to say, but let's say that if it was you or I in gymnastics 10, 20 years ago, certainly at the Olympic level or whatever, again, they would have been, whether it was the balance beam or whatever the case may be, they would have been out there competing, and they would have said, oh, okay, it'll go away. And frankly, I think the athlete or the player, depending on how how soon, or certainly if it's during a game, they're like, oh, we got to get back in, because there's this feeling of, well, I'm going to lose my chance and have to wait 4 years in the case of the Olympics, or if I miss the game, I'm liable to get replaced by somebody or cut. I mean, you go into that in many ways in the book about this pressure that there is in sports, that you can't miss time. We think about that even in our regular 9-to-5 jobs. We can't miss time, but maybe it might be monetarily. This is not necessarily monetarily. It's for almost survival of their career.
And in football, it is monetary as well, because a lot of these contracts are back-end loaded, so that if you reach certain goals, you then get a bonus at the end of the season. And so people don't understand. They think when these players have a contract that they get that guaranteed money. Unless it says guaranteed money, it can be performance-based, i.e., you have to start every single game. You have to participate in so many downs or so many quarters. So you are very reluctant to sit out or have the coach or doctor sit you out, because you're going to miss your performance bonus, which is the largest chunk of your salary.
Yeah. Let me switch to baseball for a second. And one name that comes to mind, you may not know the individual, but anyway, it was a gentleman that played for a time with the Red Sox, Pirates, had a disastrous 3 seasons here as a very highly paid player of the New York Mets, young man named Jason Bay. He had a situation where I believe he ran into a few outfield walls. Again, I'm even dating myself, going back to the days of athletes like Pete Reeser, which was way before my time. But people always said, oh, wow, what a go-getter, and he used to make those plays. But at what cost? And I think what happens then, as a batter in baseball, I'm really a true believer that the injury slows their reflexes down to the point where at the plate, that split second, we'll call it, all of a sudden turned him into from a 30 home run hitter, 100 RBIs, 300 average, to a player that at the end could barely bat 200. What's your thought on that? Do you think that trigger reflex is impacted by the fact of these hits to the head?
Well, of course, if your brain is bruised and damaged, it's going to affect your entire body and your personality and everything else.
Yeah. We're here with Dr. Gay Culverhouse, former president of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, author of Throwaway Players, The Concussion Crisis. Let me give the website for more information, www.playersoutreach.org. And while we're on that website, talk about the nonprofit organization you initially founded, the Gay Culverhouse Players Outreach Program. When was that established?
That was established shortly after I testified before Congress. It was I believe we incorporated it in the spring of 2010. And our first client, if you will, was a player that had played for us by the name, I don't know if I should say his name.
No, that's okay.
In any event, he was a player that I had great regard for. And he came out of Arkansas, and he was amazing under John McKay. But I had told Congress, they asked me, they said, what are you going to do next? And I said, I'm going to find, and I named this player. I said, I have heard that he's injured and homeless. And that's what I did. I hired some people, and they made contacts and finally found him through a cousin and his daughter. And we located him homeless, and we got him the help he needed and shepherded him through the 88 plan that the NFL has set up for these players who are fully vested, which of course in his state he did not know anything about the Plan 88. And when he had left the team, it wasn't like he had given us his forwarding address or kept in touch with us. So it was a bit of a hunt. But that's what it's all about, is locating these players, putting the word out, and letting them know that there are benefits through the NFL that they can access, and there are plenty of resources for them.
Especially in this day and age, and of course with the recent developments over the last couple of years where, this settlement that is still ongoing as we tape. Again, all I'll say to that was that the initial figure, which I believe was somewhere in the ballpark of $1 billion. I remember when I first heard that, and after, this was long before, we knew about the book or my contacts with you. And I just thought to myself, $1 billion, yeah, for, a local person sounds like a lot of money, but when it's being distributed over potentially hundreds or later on maybe several thousand individuals, doesn't go very far when it comes to the medical bills and long-term care. Because again, we're not just talking about concussions, we're talking about dementia, we're talking about total body breakdown. And, we'll go over a few examples of that are in the book. But
and do not forget that the lawyers take 40%.
Absolutely, yes. I remember the movie Aaron Brockovich. I remember that very well. 40% goes to them. And again, we understand that, again, sometimes these processes take years, and it's just not one individual, one lawyer. It's a lot of assistants and sometimes multiple lawyers that go into the process. Indeed, as I think is commonplace at any level, pee-wee, high school, college, hits to the head leads to concussions. And yes, I agree. And concussion, he totally agrees. And concussions lead to CTE. Tell us a little bit about it, because that last word is a tough one for me. Chronic traumatic
encephalopathy.
Encephalopathy, thank you. And basically that is dementia.
Basically, chronic traumatic encephalopathy is the release of the toxic protein tau, T-A-U, into the brain. And tau then does its chemical reaction on the brain and affects it in many different ways, not limited to personality disorder, movement disorder, cognitive disorder, etc. So it's more than just dementia. You lose your balance. It affects you in terms of ALS type symptoms. And Parkinson's type symptoms. There's a wide swath of symptoms that occur when tau is released into the brain.
Gotcha. Share with the audience, and also Gay, as you may not be aware of this, just some things I remember either from my childhood or then a few that I looked up, because I read a statement in a publication that talked about that the NFL in all its years has only had one on-field fatality, and you may remember this, it was prior to your time with the Bucs, but the late Chuck Hughes, who was a Lions receiver, died in October of 1971 during a game against the Chicago Bears. And when they did the autopsy, again, 1971, they found that one of his arteries was 75% blocked. This was a 28-year-old man that obviously, I don't know how he even functioned at any level with an artery blocked that much. Again, 40 some years ago, maybe medical technology was not able to diagnose that. But the NFL, of course, kind of stands by that, well, we've only had one fatality. Well, again, perhaps on the field, but I came across a couple of others going way back to the AFL days, the American Football League. 1960, the old New York Titans, who later became the Jets. Howard Glenn, then 24, died hours after a game played in Houston, so I'm sure the heat was a factor. Caused a broken neck, but yet actually ended the game, went about his business. I'm assuming must have got on a team bus or a team plane. A rookie offensive guard during a preseason game died of a broken neck that was not diagnosed. And there was a gentleman named Dr. James Nicholas. I don't know if he's still alive, but he was the team doctor for some 30-some years. That was one of the only games, preseason or pro, that he did not travel with the team. And in those days, waiting for an ambulance could be up to an hour, and there was no team doctor. So again, you hear those kind of stories, and here's someone who was just slipping away, and nobody knew to do anything about it.
We had a player by the name of Nate Wansley, rookie during preseason, who broke his neck on the field. And our team physician realized something was not right and quickly stabilized him and got him off the field. And his neck was fused a couple of days later, and he never played again.
Wow. There was, I want to say it was, because you mentioned him in the book, Kevin Everett, who played with the Bills in the late 90s. Now, it might have been another Bills player, but there was one within the last 10 or 15 years where now the procedure, when they have an injury, which initially could be neck, could be spinal, they injected within, I guess, the first few hours with steroids, or a type of steroid, that actually many feel allowed him today not to play anymore, certainly, but to walk, as opposed to some of the other gentlemen like Mike Utley and a few others throughout the years. Do you recall that now, whereas the medicine has advanced to the point where they're able to stabilize the spine with actually using steroids?
Yeah, I can't say that I know much about that at all.
Yeah, gotcha. Another example real quick, 1963, Stone Johnson out of Eddie Robinson's Grambling College. Preseason game with the Kansas City Chiefs, suffered a broken neck, partially paralyzed, blocking a kick return. Again, AFL exhibition game, guess where? In Houston. Also played, as I said, his college ball at Grambling State. And again, he wound up passing away as a result of that. And he also competed in track in the 1960 Olympics. So there was somebody that had his whole future ahead of him. But the NFL doesn't remember those days of the AFL. They don't count those anymore. It's just those more recent ones. Anyone who's seen the movie with Sandra Bullock, The Blind Side, and I remember seeing the game on TV, I certainly turned away, recalls in 1985 Joe Theismann being hit by Lawrence Taylor. I'm sure you've seen that clip. That's pretty horrific stuff.
I've seen that too many times.
Yeah, too many times. And again, kind of a flukish injury. We're not trying to say that, anyone was at fault. And certainly, obviously I know Lawrence Taylor was, as you see in the video, was greatly upset by that. But Joe did not ever play again, went on to a very successful career. And then the one I think that's most remembered in the Northeast here, at least, was in '78, Darryl Stengly of the Patriots at the time, again, exhibition games. Maybe that's why they've cut down on exhibition games, too many injuries, was paralyzed after a vicious hit by the Raiders' Art Tatum. And again, as they said, part of the game. But I think, then people kind of made a bigger issue because Tatum never approached him or never went to see him. And, again, that's a separate issue altogether. But obviously there, I guess I wonder what did the NFL do all these years for a young man like that who lived almost another 30 years. I'm sure the resources weren't there for him monetarily.
I don't know.
Yeah, no, I hear you. Dr. Gay Culverhouse joining us here on Studio 411. The book Throwaway Players, the Concussion Crisis. Players then and now who, for whatever reason, consider themselves above rules, regulations, and the law. Do you find, personally speaking, that seems to be more prevalent now than back in your days with the Buccaneers, the situations and the dilemmas that today's players on all levels get themselves into? No?
No. I think that if anything, it's just reported more now, and that the NFL is doling out penalties that they never did before.
Right.
And so it's coming to the forefront. Roger Goodell, to his credit, has made an edict that he wants there to be integrity in this game. And so for things like domestic abuse, for example, he's not going to allow it to occur. Or if it does occur, there are going to be severe consequences for it. In the past, there was sexual harassment, there was a lot of domestic violence, there was a lot of drinking, drugging, carrying of guns. There was a lot going on that was not brought to the forefront. But to Roger's credit, I think he's not going to tolerate it anymore. And that's why we're hearing about it.
Absolutely. 1974, your dad, Hugh Culverhouse, was awarded an expansion team in Florida for the great price by today's standards of $16 million, if I have my math correct. I'm not sure what $16 million would buy today. Might buy a couple of lockers. I'm not sure. But talk about when you got involved with the team working for your dad, was Pete Rozelle still involved as the commissioner, or had Paul Tagliabue already succeeded him?
No, Pete was very much the head of the league.
And I like to do this with guests when they have kind of an interaction, or they were perhaps around during a time when a person, again, like a Pete Rozelle was around. Share with us again some thoughts on him as either the interaction with him or as a commissioner. What were your remembrances of Pete Rozelle?
Well, I spent a lot of time with Pete and his wife, Carrie, personal time, and also with their good friend, Frank Gifford. And we would have great times together at their homes. But I would say that Pete and Carrie were one of the most charismatic twosome you would ever find. Yeah. And they had an agreement that they would never spend a night apart. So Carrie traveled with Pete everywhere. And it was a very loving, beautiful relationship. She had originally been married to Jack Kent Cook's son. So she knew football very well from having been the wife of the son of an owner, Jack Kent and the Redskins. She also was an emergency room nurse, and very, very bright woman. She started a foundation for children with learning disabilities and used the connections of her husband through the NFL to help raise funds for children with learning disabilities. A great organization.
During that time, and of course, Pete was commissioner for, my goodness, at least 25 years, perhaps longer. You talk in the book about distrust of the NFL going back as far as the 1970s. Elaborate briefly on that, and then also juxtapose it to your interactions with the league now, obviously, whether it's through the congressional hearings, whatever, is that still prevalent, you think, a distrust of the league in general, or has the league improved overall over these past decades?
My relationship with the league has improved. I believe that I have garnered a great deal of respect from the league. For example, if I email Roger Goodell, I get an email back within 24 hours. If I email any other person connected with the NFL office, I get an email back within 24 hours. If I place a phone call, I get a call back immediately. So in terms of respect, I believe that I have garnered a great deal of respect with the NFL. And I believe we have a good relationship. I believe they listen to me, I listen to them, and we're moving forward to make it better. I'm not distrustful as I was. I think they've made good progress and hired good people to put the integrity back into football.
A gentleman, and again, if there's been a biography of him, I have not come across it yet, but of course I knew him as a player, watching him on the field, not personally. Gene Upshaw, who of course for many years was later than the union rep for the players. A man that almost, I'm not sure how he strikes me. I mean, he was a Hall of Fame player with the Oakland Raiders. But yet, when it came to the well-being, again, I'm mentioning people like Conrad Dobler and so many others, and later in his life, seemed to almost turn a blind ear to his fellow, gridiron compadres. And was it that he had gone so far over to the owner's side, even though he was the players' union rep? What was your feeling about Gene Upshaw? It struck me as a complex gentleman.
I didn't have any dealings with him personally. I can't really speak to that.
Okay. What about any dealings with the current head, Mr. Smith, I believe, the union head, or no?
DeMaurice?
Yes.
I met DeMaurice because we sat next to each other at the hearings.
Yes.
And he had a steep learning curve. There was no doubt, but a Harvard-educated attorney, bright, very bright man, and I think he's put some good men around him to do the job of representing the players. And I think that it's a much more professional, less personality-based organization now.
Okay. I'll jump ahead here in my notes. There was a gentleman, obviously, who I am assuming is one of those folks that is working closely either within the union or within the commissioner's office, former player Troy Vincent, for those who might recall the name, former cornerback with the Dolphins, Eagles, Bills, and late in his career with the Redskins. You state in his book that he admitted to at least 6 documented concussions. He is currently the NFL Executive VP of Football Operations. Again, you would think he'd be more in tune with the fact that what needs to be done for the players, the ex-players, as well as the current players. Or
do you think he doesn't?
I'm not sure, because when I hear that someone in that kind of position is working for the league, and with the track record that again seems to be perceived, maybe it's just me, that the league has been slow to act. Now I understand now they're making big strides, but as you said earlier, a lot of it is media pressure, government pressure, where you wonder if those things weren't happening, whether they would have been as quick to react to the plight of these people. I mean, even the current players seem to turn a deaf ear to those that played during your time, and the Art Donovans, the Johnny Unitas's, the Frank Giffords, again, Frank just passed away, and obviously in 2015. But you know what I'm saying? It's just, I wonder if walking a fine line.
Well, let me say this.
Yeah.
I like Troy.
Mm-hmm.
I deal with Troy, and he's very straightforward, very above board, and he's got an unenviable job of doling out punishment.
Yeah.
And I think that he's doing a really good job for the position he's been placed in.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think the fact that he had 6 concussions really enters into it one way or the other. I've had 7 concussions, and I don't think it affects me one way or the other in terms of being able to assess situations.
Oh, no, I wasn't implying that in terms of his doing his job. It just that, again, it seemed that, and again, I guess I'll have to try to get him on the program, because I'm not trying to imply he's not either doing or capable of doing his job. It's just that I find that whether it was in Gene Upshaw's case, the minute they got a little too much in that position where they were dealing directly with the owners, that they seemed to be less, what's the word I'm looking for, less kind of considerate of their former players, their former colleagues. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
I'm having a hard time with that hypothesis.
No, okay, no problem.
Real hard time. I don't think he's, quote unquote, in bed with them. There is a layer between Troy and the owners. He's not one to pick up the phone and call them, because that's not his job.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have trouble with that hypothesis.
No problem. Again, not looking to bury him. It's just that, you know, when I saw that, given what he had been through, I just, to me, the impression is that I don't know that they're as receptive as they could be. But as you said,
maybe if you've been through it, you know what needs to be done.
Sure.
Instead of the opposite.
Yeah.
I don't think, quite honestly, there is any conspiracy going on at all.
Mm-hmm.
I think that once upon a time, the league hired a doctor, our Kaysen, and they put all of their trust in this doctor, rightly or wrongly. You have a doctor, I'm sure, that you use and you trust him. He may make decisions that are not in your best interest, not because he doesn't like you, but because of his knowledge base. And I am convinced that when Ira Kaysen said concussions don't cause harm, he really did believe that statement. And the league trusted their doctor, just as you would trust your doctor, and did not at that time seek a second opinion. Should they have, in retrospect, of course. But at the time, they did the best they could with the data they were given. Yes, he was a poor choice. Yes, he was friends with someone, and that's how he got the job. But when you choose a doctor for yourself, it's probably a friend of yours recommended or someone that you know. And they were only doing what everyone else does.
Absolutely.
And the guy didn't keep up with a certain part of medicine, and they got caught. But they change. And I have to give them all sorts of kudos for making the change and going to the extreme of having an independent neurologist on the sidelines at every game, and inspiring high schools and colleges to use certified trainers at every game, and if possible to have doctors on the sidelines. So I think a lot of good has come from an awful situation.
Gotcha. Do you think that at the, we'll stick with the high school level, do you think that, again, high schools throughout the country have been more than 50% receptive in terms of trying to take steps needed to ensure that, again, as in the pros, that there's a physician on duty, that there's obviously an ambulance or some plan of attack in the event that a player goes down, or that someone gets hit during practice? Because again, we've even up in this part of the region had even practices that have been postponed because during warm months they're practicing on AstroTurf, so we're dealing in 140-degree heat out on the field. So do you think at the high school level, from what you've seen or researched, that they're taking the necessary steps to ensure the safety of the young students out there.
Absolutely. I can speak to that. My grandson plays high school football now. Actually, he's redshirted for his first year, but his team has 2 doctors and trainers at every game. And the trainers are at every single practice. And this is a private school with not a lot of resources, but they pull the resources out for their athletes.
Right. In the book, and again, the book Throwaway Players, talking to Dr. Gabe Culverhouse this hour on Studio 411. The book, when it came out almost 2 years ago, you mentioned about only 2% of retired players receive any type of NFL disability benefit, partial or permanent. Do you have any figures on, has that increased dramatically over the last year, year and a half?
I can't say that it's increased dramatically. What you have to understand is, just like the teams were cut down a couple of weeks ago, there were a lot of players playing football in professional teams. And they are no longer, and they didn't play 4 years to be vested. So if you count all of those men who were playing in the first game in August, I don't know how you do a percentage on that, but they are not going to receive any benefits from the NFL. You have to be fully vested,
right,
to receive benefits. And so when you think year after year of all the players that are brought in and the players that are drafted, I don't know how one does the math, but I'd be hard-pressed to put a percentage that it's increased.
Exactly. I mean, I assume the percentage was based on final cut players, meaning that during the course of now the 16-game season. And again, one thing I had forgotten, again, from many years ago, was back in the day, the season was what? I think it was originally, wasn't it like 12 games or 14? It's grown steadily. I think, thank goodness, they've resisted going to an 18-game season. But what I had forgotten was that the preseason, back in the days of Johnny Unitas, Bart Starr, there were 6 exhibition games. And I got to tell you, growing up, I thought at least the latter 3 games were pretty competitive, whereas now it's kind of like, a guy plays a couple of downs and then he sits down, and it's really not, that competitive.
They don't want to injure their star players, except you look at what happened to RG3 this year. They overplayed him in preseason. Did they do that intentionally because they wanted to use that new quarterback, or why? You have to ask yourself, did they put him in for so many games and so many downs?
Yeah, and
with an inexperienced offensive line, doesn't make good sense. It was almost like you were begging the question to have him injured.
And I believe as we go to tape, I believe that he is now the 3rd string. So I think it's almost like, I think I just answered the question. They really did not factor into the plans. Now, he made the team, but again, for how long? And you certainly know that, from 1 week to the next, and with a lot of these contracts, I don't know his contract, but so many of them, as you said, unless they're front-loaded, like an Eli Manning who just re-signed for a $65 million guaranteed up front out of the 85, then that's a rarity. Most of them are not structured that way.
Well, RG, if they sign him next year, they have to pay him a $16 million signing bonus. And you've got Gruden in as his first year at coach. Gruden has his pet player that he drafted. And that player is now number 1 on the depth chart. RG has gone to 3. You can about figure they'd like RG to go away because they don't want to pay him that $16 million.
Absolutely, yeah.
How do you get him to go away? You get him injured.
Yeah. There we go. Sounds like an old Burt Reynolds movie I remember, The Longest Yard. I don't know. Um, Give me some memories on a player that I think first enlightened us to the dangers of steroids as well as hits, concussions. Lyle Alzado. I can remember as clear as day seeing him with a do-rag, almost emaciated, and preaching to the young people and adults out there the evils of what he had done and how it had taken a toll on he and his body, and eventually within the year he passed away. A guy that was a tremendous player, but you wonder, was he tremendous because he was doing the steroids, or was he truly a gifted player?
And you can't blame brain tumor on steroids. I mean, that's how he died.
Yeah.
But it's no secret that steroids have increased men from 300 to 365 pounds in a year. And with that bulk, it puts an inordinate amount of pressure on your heart. Your heart does not know if it's carrying 365 pounds of fat or muscle. And it really doesn't matter. The pressure's the same on your body and your joints. And I don't know if we can ever get players or athletes off steroids completely. I think it's a wonderful idea, but in reality, they keep finding ways to use performance-enhancing drugs, whether it's the Poetin that Lance Armstrong used, or, you know, blood doping, if you will. It's very difficult for athletes to be content with their own body, particularly as they age and they become more competitive in their sport.
I believe it was in your book. I don't have the page here, but there was a doctor that I guess had worked with the Olympics. This was, I think, back in the 60s, and you talk about it in the book, that in effect was the father of introducing steroids into pro football, correct?
Exactly. He had worked with the German weightlifting team. And one of the players out in California had heard about the weightlifters because he had gone over to the Olympics to try his hand at weightlifting. And he had seen these massive bodies picking up these tremendous weights, and asked around and found this particular trainer and brought him to California. And that's what started it in the NFL.
There you go. Again, tremendous stories in the book. Again, I was reminded of people like Mike Webster, who at age 50, a Hall of Fame center, basically died homeless and with almost not knowing who he was, where he was. Junior Seau, again, another Hall of Famer who was inducted into the Hall of Fame in 2015. I believe his daughter was able to, she attended. I don't know if she was able to give a speech on behalf of her dad, but again, died in his early 40s. Andre Waters at 44 years of age. You mentioned, and again in the book, Throwaway Players, some terrific ball players that you had during your tenure. Richard Wood, so many others that obviously had major issues, and some that are still with us are having even more issues as we speak.
It's very sad to see someone that you knew as a strong, virile young man become bent over and decrepit with arthritis, whose brain is no longer functioning as quickly as it was. It's very, very sad. It's incredibly sad. But today's players, you have to say, are warned extensively and know what they're going into more than the players did 20 years ago. This group of players is very well informed, and you look at the man that was drafted in the first round who played one season and quit.
Oh, and with the 49ers, correct.
Yes, yeah. And he realized that, I think he even said, I'd rather have my brain than the career. And he gave up millions of dollars and had to pay back his signing bonus and everything else. But decisions like that are being made with forethought and information that was not possible 20, 30 years ago.
Absolutely. Statistic here, 1991 to 2003, high school, steroid use doubled. Now, there's a frightening figure. And again, a lot of it, when you hear reports of speaking with students, some, again, obviously, that have had major issues. Again, it's all about the competition, and you know, it's just sad to see that they feel that they need to rely on that. But when they're 165 pounds trying to block like a 250 linebacker or a defensive player, whatever, it's a little tough to do. You can't bulk up that quick, or certainly not good. Yeah, and then players over the last several years with hits to the head, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, the things that happen on the field. There was a young man there, I'm blanking on his name right now, again with Rutgers. We mentioned Rutgers earlier, who sustained an injury and is paralyzed to this day. One of the NFL.
Well, Nick Buchanan's son played for Citadel, and in one hit was paralyzed from his waist down.
Exactly, yeah.
I mean, those things go on, unfortunately, all the time. There have been a number of deaths this year and last year among high schoolers. There's a law out in Texas called Will's Law about getting the trainers and doctors on the field in Texas on the high school level. But mainly what I'm trying to focus on with children, with Pee-wee and up, is to have them self-identify. Because your mother in the stand or the coach or the trainer will not always see the play that you're in. They won't necessarily see that you got a whiplash concussion. You run off the field and you look okay. You sit down and all of a sudden the room spins, you see stars, you hear ringing in your ears. I would like all of those players to be able to know the signs and symptoms of concussion and take themselves out. To be able to go to the coach, their mom, someone on the sideline, and say, I'm injured. I need help. And if we can do that, we could stop some of these second concussion syndromes and some of these multi-concussion events that really lead to serious damage down the road.
And a great way to end the program, Dr. Gay Culverhouse, telling it like it is, as Howard Cosell used to say. Throwaway players, the concussion crisis from Pee-wee football to the NFL. Gay, a pleasure. We've worked hard to get you on board, and we hope to talk to you again and look for more from you. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Larry. It's a pleasure.
And that's it for this episode of Studio 411. We thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again next time. Take care.